So welcome to my site, everybody. My name is Paul Smyers. I am the licensed real estate agent. I live in the Shenandoah Valley, and I host this site about Virginia homesteads. And today I'm going to talk about something really important, which we all know about, is the roof. The old idea of having a roof over your head is so important when you go looking for property. So I want to talk a little bit about it today. I'm not an expert on roofs, but I've seen many types of roofs. I've traveled a lot in the world, and I've seen other kinds of construction and so on. And of course, having a proper roof is very important, because if you have a bad roof, it can destroy an expensive house. See, so the kind of construction that we have typically in the United States is limited to a certain extent because of our history and the rules and so on. But if you travel around the world, you'll see some very unusual houses with the types of roofs that we can authorize here. But in the countryside in particular, which is my specialty, you'll see a lot of a certain kind of roof that I'll talk to you about in a minute here that is extremely reliable and extremely common also. But before I continue about that, I want to point out that in many of my videos, I have books in the background that I recommend. Really interesting books. If you look at the title while you're watching the video, you'll see I rotate them. I don't want to talk about them too much individually, but I have found a lot of resources out there, and I try to share resources whether you buy from me or through me or you're in another part of the country or whatever. It's a really interesting conversation we're having about basic housing and so on. So let's talk about the roofs. Generally speaking, in the United States, in the early days of people setting up, we had, of course, the Native Americans, and they had some very unusual types of homes depending on the climate and where they located, what materials are available and so on, including things like teepees and domes and igloos and all that kind of stuff. So as this country got settled, I'm in the United States in Virginia, you'll find that, especially on the east side of the country where it's older, you'll find some really interesting roofs, and one of them I'm going to talk about right now, and that is the old style of metal tin roof. In the old days, when you had to build a new house, you either had a choice. I mean, some of the log cabins, you might see that they had logs on top of that and at an angle and so on. But to seal off, generally, you had to have something, and in the early days of settlement, they didn't really have options of having long sheets of plywood and so on with all that nice vinyl or anything else, any kind of a plastic material that seals the moisture. They didn't have all that, so they had to deal with a different kind of situation, and one of the ways they dealt with the long-term reliability of a roof was to get sheets of metal. Now, if you're really lucky, you might find an old house in this country that has raised ridge, copper panel, original copper roofing that has nice age to a beautiful green patina. If you're lucky enough to find something like that in anywhere in the world, just kiss the ground that you're on, because it's so rare and very expensive to do these days. Now, I have a metal roof on this structure where I'm living, and I bought this property for a reason, because one thing I noticed, there are multiple structures on this property, and most of them are relatively new. The house itself is 80 years old with the original metal roof. It's raised ridge panels. Back in the 40s, 1940s, that was the thing. Okay, we're going to build this old farmhouse. We want it to last a really long time. And what material you're going to use? You're going to use raised ridge metal roofing. Now, I had an inspector come. I've seen many inspectors, but the one that came here to inspect my property told me that these metal roofs are the longest lasting roofs as far as inspections go. So that I want to recommend heavily. Another feature about roofing is that sooner or later, especially if you get the sheet, the regular sheeting, the regular shingles type of roof, eventually 20-30 years go by and it's going to need some attention. It might be missing shingles, it might have some water underneath one of them and rotted some of the panels, you might have some leakage and so on. And that can be a fairly expensive process. But there are teams that'll come out there and replace your roof and so on. But one factor is the design of the roof itself. If you look at some of these modern structures, I drive around some of these neighborhoods, new construction, I look at the roofs and I go, God forbid, when that finally fails, they got all these different gutters and all these dormers and all these ridges, and there's no particular area where you can put a solar panel. They're all angled in different angles and maybe shading part of the house or someone else's house. It's just a hodgepodge of roof connections and so on, and that can be a very expensive roof because sooner or later a roof will fail. Now, the modern types of roofs, you can get sheet metal, raised ridge roofing with about an 18-inch to 2-foot type of panel. Another type of roof that you can find on outer structures that have no living arrangements inside, but the roof, for example, on my workshop, it has a concrete floor and it keeps dry, but the roofing itself is basically these interlacing corrugated sheets of tin or whatever, galvanized metal or whatever they use nowadays. Now, it has a bit of rust here and there and a few little leaks here and there, but it's not serious because it's not residential. But nevertheless, that roof has lasted quite a long time and it's easy to repair. You find a few leaks on a rainy day, you mark them, you go up there, you seal them, you clean it up, you spray paint it, clean up the rust a bit and put a nice coating and new paint on the top, and you're good for many years, and it's not very expensive. Another aspect of modern roofs, if you have a 2-story house with all the dormers and everything like modern houses, you got a 4-bedroom and every which way there's a little roof going this way and that way, and everywhere there's a gutter is vulnerable. And so if you find a roof that has very, very simple lines, one level house, the house that I'm living in is just one level, easy to replace. God forbid if I had to put some repair on my roof, it's so easy to get to, and I haven't needed it in all these years. So the angle of the sun actually matters a lot, because in my particular case, and these old farmers, some of these old people that built homes long ago, they were very clever about the way they positioned the house, the angles. Now, it just so happens that on a low, easy to reach type of house with one side facing east and one side facing west, the sun will come up, you'll have the solar light all the way across, all the way through, and in the afternoon you have the other side of your house, it'll go down, and you'll have both sides of your house roof exposed with easy access to install solar. And you can also get radiant heat, and sometimes you can actually heat water by having pipes up on a hot roof, especially if it's metal and reflects a lot of heat. So when you look at a property, you want to think about how long is going to last the roof, because like I said, a bad roof can totally ruin a very expensive home. And you can see what happens, for example, around wherever they have hurricanes and so on. So again, I want to emphasize this. I want to make the video kind of short, but at the same time, think very carefully about the position of the roof that's on your property, the type of material that it's built with, and the angles of the sun exposure, and just basically how easy is it to attend to if you really need it. The same way with chimneys that happen to be on the property. If you got a chimney like way up there, 50 feet up there, well, it's going to cost a lot more to check out and more possibility of getting clogged. I know somebody, a friend of mine in another state, has a huge Amish barn on the property, and it's got a slate roof. Talk about materials. I mean, that thing, it has a very expensive, nowadays they don't even build those very well. Who wants to build a slate roof when it's expensive? It's way up there. But this Amish barn had like 12 by 12 beams going up and holding it up there. And, it's a great structure, but frankly, I don't want to own it because, one little hurricane or branch or something like that comes along and boom, I got to call some guy who knows how to fix Amish old slate roofs, see. So a little lightheartedness about this, but it's a very big subject. We start with the roof construction. We're going to talk about the walls. We're talking about the foundations and so on. There's many different types of foundations that are found in our country, and dating back many, many years. Of course, in Virginia, you're going to see some basically rocks. Basically, they put rocks down there with some dirt, and God to help you. They put some beams across there. That was their foundation back then. But nowadays, there's a lot more regulations. So like and share, please, and your comments. If you have any questions, I try to help people from anywhere. I am trying to build a community here of people who are like-minded into rural living and the wholesome type of lifestyle we have out here. So thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you in some of my other content. Thanks.